The third topic of the exam is called Understanding Tools and Tool Settings. In this topic, the main two areas are going to be choosing an appropriate tool and adjusting tool settings. As always, in this first video, I'm going to give you an overview of the topic, and then we are going to look into each of these areas in more details. So first of all, I would like to explain a very important definition called anti-alias, which will be mentioned a couple of times in the exam, and it's very important that you know what it means. So if I make selections in Photoshop, and maybe I'm using the rectangular marquee tool, and then I fill this in with black by using a keyboard shortcut to fill with the foreground color, that's Alt Backspace, then I created this black rectangle. And if I zoom closer to it, now I will see that it nicely fills in the pixels. If I zoom back and I use the other selection tool called elliptical marquee tool, and I create another selection, and I fill this in again, and then I zoom closer, we can see that in this case, even though our selection ends here, for example, we still have a couple of gray pixels outside of the selection. And in some cases also inside. So why is that happening? The reason for this is the option here on the top called anti-alias, which smooths the edge transition. Or it's also called stair-stepping when we see this transition. If I just go back one step and I create another selection, but I'm going to turn off the anti-alias option and fill that in with black, then you can see this stair-stepping. And this is a much harsher boundary between the circle and the background. So even from a distance, we can see these pixels. If I go back and I show you the other circle when I create it, but I have to check the anti-alias first and then create the circle. So now if I show this to you, you can see even from this distance, it looks much smoother on the edges, thanks to the anti-alias. So now that you understand what's anti-alias, it's very important to also know on which tools it is an option to turn it on or off. Well, we already know that on the elliptical marquee tool, it's an option that's available. On the magic wand, we also have anti-alias. Then on the lasso tool, we also have it, as you can see. And most of the time, by default, these options are turned on. And then on the other lasso tools like the polygonal lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool, we also have anti-alias. And then also it's important to remember that even for the type tool, we have anti-alias options, but here we even have more options. So we can choose either to have no anti-alias at all on our typography or to use one of these default settings. It's also a good idea to remember all of these. So for the type tool, we have none, sharp, crisp, smooth, and strong or Mac LCD or Mac options. Generally in this topic, it's a good idea to go through all the tools in Photoshop and check all the options available here in the options bar. So the same thing applies, for example, to drawing tools, where you can look for similarities. And one of the similarities you will find is the mode option. Well, that's available for almost all these drawing tools. And the mode is basically the blend mode. So blend modes you can set on layers or also on tools. And there's a couple of things I would like to show you because it might also come up in the exam. Like how to switch quickly between these modes. Well, you can use Shift, plus and minus to quickly cycle through the available blend modes. As you can see, I'm changing it there on the top. So Shift plus and minus or underscore. Or you can also hold down Alt and Shift together and then press, for example, M to jump to multiply. Or you can press N to jump back to normal. And all of these blend modes have a keyboard shortcut assigned to it, like Alt Shift O will be overlay. And Alt Shift S will be screen, and so on and so forth. And just as an example, if I select multiply and then I choose a different color, I can show you that it looks like when we have the multiply turned on, that if I select another color for my brush tool, so it looks like marker pens. So the more I draw over an area, the darker it will get. So it multiplies the color information and eventually it will get black. On the contrary, if I choose screen and I draw over areas, it will make them brighter. Screen mode is also useful to restore highlights. Darken is another one which might come up in the exam. Replaces pixels that are lighter than the blend color without affecting pixels that are darker than the blend color. So for example, if I choose a much darker color, if I draw over these colors, they will be replaced. But if I draw over a black circle, that won't be replaced because that was originally darker than this color. And again, the opposite of darken is lighten. So if I choose that one, then this one will replace pixels that are darker than the blend color without affecting the pixels that are brighter than the blend color. So if I draw over these bright details, they won't be changed. But if I draw over the black detail, now that will be changed. But even like the white background won't be affected with the same color, this darker blue color, because that's brighter than the color I'm using. So it will only be affecting colors that are darker than the selected foreground color. And there's also a couple of special blending modes called behind and clear, which will only be available if you have transparency on your layers. So let me create a new layer and show you how it works. So if I set my blend mode back to normal on this layer and I just draw a part here, and then I'm going to select behind, for example, and change my color to red. Now if I start drawing, it will only affect the transparency of this layer, so it won't affect the area where I have this darker blue part. And the same way, if I change to clear, and again I change my color, let's just say to yellow, then that means it will get rid of everything that is not transparent. So it will turn everything into transparency. And then there's also another blend mode called color, which is useful for coloring monochrome images or tinting color images. So let me show that to you as well. I'm going to switch to this document and I'm going to change the mode to color, and I choose a different color, let's just say purple. And if I start drawing over the image with this purple color, you can see we can easily tint the image with this color. So this will maintain the saturation and the luminance levels. It will only change the hue of these details. Now, if I have a black and white image, which I can very easily achieve by using an adjustment and choose black and white. So I'm just going to click on OK. So now that we have a monochrome image, we can color this monochrome image, again using the same technique. So whatever color I use, it will be added to the image. Once again, keeping the luminance values the same. And on contrary to the color blend mode, we have luminosity, where it works the opposite way. So in this case, we are going to use the luminance of the foreground color or blend color and will overwrite the luminance values in an image. And in case of a monochromatic image, that means it will completely turn these details into gray. But what if I go back before it was turned into grayscale? In that case, as you can see, I'm going to remove all the luminance details and override them with this one specific luminance value that I have on my color. So I'm maintaining the hue and saturation of the pixels. I'm only replacing the luminance values. So as you can see, there's a lot of things you can achieve with blend modes together with tools. Not necessarily used all the time, but in special cases it's good to know how to work with them. And especially for the exam, it's very important to remember and try to practice all of these. And there's two more things I would like to mention in this overview. One of them is the tool presets, which you can assign to any of the tools in Photoshop. And this is the option where you can find them, the default ones, and you can also create your own tool presets. Essentially, this is when you can save a set of options for a tool. So if you click on the new icon, it will ask you for a name, And it will ask you to decide whether you want to also save in this new tool preset the color that you have at the moment selected. And just to see the options we have here, if we click on this drop down icon, we can find a couple of presets here, like dry media or text or splatter brush tool presets, and so on and so forth. But remember, it's available not only for the brush tool, but even for the eyedropper tool, for example. So even though there's no standards or default tools preset saved here, you can still save your own eyedropper tool presets. And last but not least, we also have a couple of options in the preferences under cursors for tools. So if we go there, you can see we can choose whether we want to see our painting cursors and other cursors in standard or precise mode. Precise will usually be a crosshair, while standard will show the icon. And for painting tools, we also have a couple of additional options here, like show only the crosshair while painting, which is quite a useful option. So if I have the brush tool and I start drawing, it will only show the crosshair while I'm painting, and when I let go, then I will see again the edges of my brush. And if I go back to the preferences under general, we also have a couple of options, like the hot color picker option, which I'm going to explain in another video in this topic in more detail. And we also have options like the use shift key for tool switch, which I already mentioned in a previous topic. Or this one, change round brush hardness based on HUD vertical movement. Again, I'm going to explain this when I talk about using the brush tool. So it is also a good idea to go through the preferences and see which settings apply to tools in Photoshop. And now that we covered all this, in the next video I'm going to explain what you need to know about the selection tools in Photoshop.